Welcome to Friday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live here on Giants.com as well as the mobile app. He's Paul Dottino. I'm Lance Medow with you for the next 60 minutes. And a reminder, multiple ways you can interact with us here on the program. You give us a ring, 201-939-4513. You can also hit us up on Twitter, hashtag Giants Chat. And as a reminder, you can find the archive of this show and our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at Giants.com/podcast. So the Giants are going to wrap up the week and then look ahead to Sunday's game, the regular season opener against the Cowboys on Sunday Night Football. So Brian Daboll spoke before we came on. You have a big smirk on your face.
Oh, yeah, the madness begins Sunday night. Oh, yeah.
You know, I did not realize that Randy Savage came back from the dead. That's amazing. We're really calling on higher powers here, gearing up for the 2023 season.
Trust me.
Yeah.
He's not nearly as excited as I am right now.
Okay. Well, I would hope so, considering one of you is here and the other one is not, according
This is
to
true.
what I've been told. Yes. And for those younger viewers that may not get the reference, Macho Man Randy Savage, a very well-known wrestler, one of the all-time greats. So if you do not know who that is, I suggest you maybe head to YouTube.
Yeah.
Yes. And Paul is just trying so desperately to do him justice. But I can see
hard.
every other wrestling fan
It's
cringing
hard.
somehow, yes,
It's
in the
hard.
vicinity.
It's
okay.
hard.
Can we now get to business as usual, or would we like to impersonate
No.
Hulk Hogan or Andre the Giant or Roddy Piper as well?
I could do a really good Grand Wizard.
Grand
And
Wizard.
a pretty good Freddie Blassie, too.
Okay, well, look,
But
you're
we'll-
throwing
we'll-
in managers, too. I didn't realize that.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely.
Slick maybe will be next
No,
as well?
no,
Slick?
no, he's a
Jimmy
little-
Hart, Mr. Fuji?
No, you know
Okay.
why? You know
Yeah.
why? Because those guys were a little bit beyond when I was little. When
Okay.
I was little,
No, I
it was
understand. You're
Albano, Blassie, and the Grand Wizard.
Yes, absolutely. No, I get that.
You
But I
know.
think you know who I'm
I know who
referencing,
you
though.
mean, but
you
I
were watching long enough to at least.
But
Yes.
as a young child, I practiced those managers, those three managers. I
Yes.
mean, you know, it was. What can I say?
And the product is amazing.
Superstar
It resembles it so
Billy
much.
Graham McMahon. He's going to take the belt from Bruno Sammartino.
Well, we are not setting
That
the
was
stage.
the Grand Wizard for those of you who are too young to remember.
We are not setting the stage for WrestleMania or the Royal Rumble or Survivor Series, but you can add all of that up as we gear up for Sunday Night Football between the Cowboys and the Giants at MetLife Stadium. So Brian Daboll, as I mentioned, spoke to the media earlier today,
Yes.
and probably the biggest takeaway of all, and this is extremely encouraging news, even though there are 7 players listed on the injury report, Paul, he says everybody is going to be out there today once again, and then they're going to have to make the decision about who they want to deactivate and who will be inactive. And normally you go into a season, even in the early stages, most teams have some decisions already made for them. Here,
Right.
the Giants at least have some flexibility, and that's obviously great news.
Well, all 53 will be out there doing something. Now, you mentioned the 7 on the injury report. Well, that's because those guys are limited. They will not necessarily do everything at practice. But the fact that they're at least doing some of the stuff goes to show you that, okay, nobody is already ruled out. And look, folks, you've been watching the Giants program, BBKL, and watching this team for a long time. Very rarely in the last half a dozen years have we been able to tell you that they're going into a game with the full complement of 53 to choose from.
Sure, 100%. And that includes, by the way, Wan'Dale Robinson. And
Correct.
Brian Daboll was also asked about Wan'Dale. Well, what is his likelihood given the fact that he recently came off of PUP and he wasn't ruling him out? He says, we'll put him through the test of practice.
I saw him
we'll
out
see
there
where it
doing
goes.
individual
Exactly.
drills with the
Yeah.
wide receivers just now. So I don't know how much he will do, but he's in gear and running around.
Well, and Paul, you and I have talked about this on the air as well as off the air. If they felt good enough to activate him from PUP,
Right.
that to me is evidence alone that he has a good shot of
the
playing.
rule of thumb, right? If you're a PUP guy, it means at least 4 games.
Yep.
So if you're going to take him off PUP, basically that's telling you that the trainers have given the opinion to the coaching staff that you probably have a realistic chance to get him back in 2 weeks. Certainly no more than 3. Otherwise, why would you take him off PUP?
Oh, of course. You'd keep him there. And then you'd say, all right, we understand we're going to bite the bullet. He'll miss the first 4 games, and then we'll move on
Right.
according to plan. No, I'm completely with you. So even though Brian Daboll's not revealing all of his game plan, not that he would do under
No.
any normal circumstances, I think the writing on the wall at least is encouraging for Wan'Dale Robinson. Speaking of not unveiling much of anything, though maybe we got some crumbs. He was asked about the offensive line and whether or not they have settled on their 2 guards. He gave an answer. He said they've settled on 2 guards, but he wouldn't ascertain and provide who exactly the 2 of them are. And he also, I don't think he gave confirmation. I know a lot of people who cover the team are reading into this. I don't think he gave a definitive answer, Paul, as to whether or not they absolutely won't rotate personnel.
He did
based
not.
on his answer.
He did not give a definitive answer. And I think that, John and I talked about this on Wednesday. Did you talk with Jonathan about it yesterday?
No, John was on with Jonathan.
Okay.
Yesterday. Yeah.
I think our gut feeling is because the Ezeudu-Bredesen competition at left guard was so close that it makes a lot more sense and logic to go with the experienced veteran against Dan Quinn right out of the box opening night. It just seems to be, if they were going to be that close, and I think Bredesen actually edged Ezeudu anyway. Bredesen picked up his game. He had a really good summer. Now, Ezeudu had a good summer too, so this is not a knock on him at all. But the experience factor against Quinn in particular, Dan Quinn, who will give you an awful lot of pressure.
And stunts.
With his defensive front, the twists, the stunts. It just seems like the logical way to go is to lean to Bredesen.
Well, and it's funny you brought that up because we've had questions on that topic all throughout the offseason.
We have.
And
It's been a good fight.
Sure, but I'm talking about we've had fans call in and ask about if you had the decision, what you would do, and my response was totally in line with you. Regardless of how the rest of the competition plays out, I would say you're going up against a defense that has been together under Dan Quinn for each of the last 2 seasons, has led the NFL in takeaways, and they're bringing back the bulk of that unit. For the sake of warm-up game, comfort level, I'd feel a lot better having the veteran Ben Bredesen, who has a lot more experience and starts under his belt, go out there week 1. And then, once again, week to week, you evaluate. You see how things play out. It's not to say that Joshua Ezeudu doesn't deserve opportunities, but right out of the gates, for the sake of playing next to a rookie center in John Michael Schmitz, I think it's important that if he had Bredesen and Mark Lewinsky next to him, knowing what Dallas is going to have up its sleeve and the pressure and the stunts and the twists and the turns and this and that, I think the most sensible decision is to put the polished veteran in that spot.
I think a couple of things to keep in mind. A, we don't know if Ezeudu does get some reps, and he might.
He could.
Especially
Absolutely,
in
yeah.
obvious running situations.
Sure.
You're talking 4-minute offense. Ezeudu is a bigger, thicker, wider, more sturdy, more powerful lineman than Bredesen is.
Yeah.
So there could be scenarios in the game where they would want Ezeudu in there, maybe even inside the 5. You get in the deep red zone, they may decide that they want Ezeudu in there. So that's possible. I think the other thing is, all during the offseason, the hope, of course, was that Ezeudu, as a former third-round pick, now in his second season, would accelerate his development so quickly that he would seize the starting job. Well, he performed well this summer, but Bredesen just decided, you know what? I'm going to hold him off. I'm not going to let him just take that job from me. And Bredesen has played some of the best football that I think he's ever played, including when he came out of Michigan and was with the Baltimore Ravens.
For a few seasons before he came over to the Giants. The other thing that's important to note with respect to your point about Ezeudu, if you remember the opener last season against Tennessee, when they were run-heavy, Ezeudu was in for those drives. So that's more of a reason why they could very well implement that game plan again. I could absolutely see that play out. That's why, once again, if you go back and you listen once the press conference is going to be posted, if it hasn't already, on Giants.com and the social media platforms, I would not interpret anything that Dable said that ruled out some type of a rotation. All he was asked about is, have you set on who the 2 starting guards are? And his answer was yes. And then the follow-up was, would you mind revealing it? And he said absolutely not, which was the most stunning development of all based on anything else that we had anticipated.
He gave
from
us
Friday's
one
press
piece
conference.
of information today, that they were going to run the wet ball drills at practice this afternoon, because there's a 96% chance of rain Sunday, a 40% chance of rain Sunday night. And so he is running wet ball drills at practice today in case there's inclement weather.
Which makes sense, because if there's going to be rain, it's going to be hot, humidity. I think you want to prepare for everything according to plan. Just like Dallas, for example, actually moved up. I don't know if you saw their practices the last day or two.
I did not.
To early in the morning to accommodate the Texas heat, which is unreal, of course. But also they want to simulate, because it's been extremely hot in the New York, New Jersey region over the last few days.
Well, the humidity's been vicious.
Yeah, well, it feels like we're in the middle of July. Doesn't feel like we're in the early stages of September. It's crazy. So that's more of a reason I think both teams are planning accordingly that the weather could be something that they have to combat here moving forward. Speaking of the injury report, let's go over to Dallas's side of things because for the Cowboys, Tyron Smith was added to the injury report. Their starting left tackle yesterday with an ankle issue. He still was a limited participant. As it stands right now, I'm not hearing anything that is worrisome or serious from the Dallas people. And also, Tyler Smith, the real test for him, the left guard who was a rookie last year, is going to be they are going to practice on Saturday before they head to East Rutherford, New Jersey. Mike McCarthy normally does this. Not an intense practice, but that's going to be the litmus test for Tyler Smith. If he could get through that, and this is an injury Mike McCarthy indicated that Tyler Smith has never had to deal with. You know when normally a player has a hamstring issue or a calf issue, Paul, they go back and they're like, all right, yeah, he dealt with
What's
that
your track
3
record?
years ago. Correct. How did we handle it? Did we immediately get him back on the practice field? Do we need to shut him down for 2 weeks? They have no intel with respect to Tyler Smith because he's never gone through this. So that's the other thing that enters the realm of a little bit of the unknown with respect to that.
You know, I don't know exactly because obviously I haven't followed the Cowboys very strongly here during the final week up to the opening day, but I'm looking at Richards as a day 3 rookie. As the on the depth chart that I'm looking at as their backup left guard.
Yeah, I heard though that Chuma Edoga
would
could
it be
the
him?
guy that may be next in line. It's possible.
I'll tell you what. Either way, big edge Giants.
Well,
either way.
Of course. I mean, Smith,
Big
like
edge.
I said, had a solid rookie campaign, and he, remember, played 2 positions because he started out at left tackle when Tyron Smith was out,
Yes.
and then they moved him inside.
Yes.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. They're much stronger with those 2 guys on the left side. Richards, coincidentally, another North Carolina product, by the way, who was teammates with McKeithen as well as Azudu, but you don't have nearly as much experience. Actually, believe it or not, if you look at the Cowboys' depth chart, they did not keep a lot of options on the back end of their roster.
Especially experienced.
Yeah. It's a lot of unknown back there.
I know.
Yeah, more of a reason why it's important to stay healthy, at least in the early stages of the season.
Exactly why I think their 53 is a third-place team in the NFC East. I'm sorry. I just do. And now a lot of Dallas fans are giving me a lot of heat over it. I'm sorry. You got the third-place team. That's what I see.
Well, time will tell based on how we see things play out in terms of the regular season. The other note on the injury report, Donovan Wilson, one of their starting safeties. Now, the Cowboys' base defense has 3 safeties to begin with.
Right.
Because Jaron Kearse plays an awful lot, and we saw that last season. So if Wilson can't play, and probably all things are trending towards him not playing, given the fact that he did not practice the last few days with a calf issue, they have Kearse, as I mentioned, to play alongside Malik Hooker. And Jordan Lewis is also back in the mix, and he was hurt last season. So I don't know how detrimental, I guess, that is. I would say this. Tyler Smith not playing is a bigger blow to me than Donovan Wilson not being out there, if you were to compare the 2.
I agree with you. That would be the bigger blow, but I do think the safety spot is important because
for
now
Waller.
how are you going to
No,
how are
100%.
you
I'm with
going to
you.
scheme against Darren Waller if one of your top 3 safeties is out of the lineup?
No, that's fair. I just feel them having Kearse at least gives them an experienced veteran to move around in that department, as opposed to offensive line we were just talking about.
That's a big drop-off.
You don't have a lot of attractive options.
Big drop-off.
Behind Tyler Smith.
Totally agree.
Yeah. So that's the layout of the land in terms of the injury report between the Giants and the Dallas Cowboys. Now, as far as the head-to-head matchup, and we've talked about a lot of these different elements, I think when you look at, once again, the Cowboys' defense, you are talking about what is rare, Paul, because you and I, we've had conversations. You don't pick up where you left off every season.
No.
That doesn't work like that in the NFL. But the fact that Dallas has led the NFL in takeaways each of the last 2 seasons, okay, that is remarkable and has been up there in turnover differential. That to me is an example of, and this is the exception, when you have a coordinator in a scheme where a big part of the identity of that scheme, a staple, is to take away the football, to get guys in position to do that, and you do it 2 years in a row, I think you deserve a little bit more stock behind that than if you did it once and then it didn't come back to fruition for the next 5 years or so.
Takeaways are a major characteristic of a Dan Quinn defense and have been for many, many years. Brian Daboll was asked about that today, and the one element that he said, besides the schemes that he uses, is that they've always had a lot of fast players
Speed.
on their defense. Speed has been the constant on every one of Quinn's units. And when you have speed, well, not only can you scheme up a lot of things because you know your guys can get where they need to be, but it also allows them sometimes to use their makeup speed, if you will, to just flat out make a play on the ball.
And we know that the Cowboys, especially at that linebacker position, when guys like Sean Lee and Leighton Vander Esch, speaking of guys that can cover sideline to sideline, when they've been out of the lineup, Cowboys defense has been completely different.
Yeah, everybody knows when Sean Lee came out of Penn State, I was a huge Sean Lee fan. And when Dallas got him, it was like, oh, man, like a
It's the story of your life.
There's been a lot of guys
right.
who I wanted in the draft that other teams wound up scapping up. And, yeah, that was one of them. That was one of them. And John took so much pleasure in knowing that every year I'd have to see Sean Lee twice.
Yeah, because it's extra painful when the player
really is.
stays within the division. But wasn't there a running back that went to Washington in recent history that you like too? There's been other players.
Well, I was a Samaje Perine guy
That was it. Yeah, Samaje
who has actually had a very interesting NFL career from having some fumbleitis when he first got to the league with Washington.
Yep.
He has carved out a pretty nice niche for himself several years later.
Oh, he was a really solid backup to Joe Mixon in Cincy, especially when Mixon was sidelined. And now I actually like him in that role for Javonte Williams in Denver. The Broncos went out and added him. And remember, Javonte Williams is coming off a serious knee injury. He should be ready to go for the start of the season. But I'm with you. He carved out for a guy that did not have a lot of starting opportunities, being the workhorse.
He's been around, about
absolutely.
7 years now? 8 years in the league?
Yeah.
And the other guy I really liked come out of the draft was Kenneth Gainwell. Wound up with the
Another
Eagles.
one, Philadelphia.
Another guy I liked.
There you go, in the division. So, see, Sean Lee's not the only guy.
Yeah, but I also liked Eric Gray. And they got Eric Gray.
So maybe the tides are starting to turn.
And I was 100% locked in on Barkley, and they got Barkley here too. So
and another Penn State guy.
Not so bad.
Like Sean Lee. Yes. As far as the biggest storylines coming out of this game, we've talked about it a lot throughout the course of the offseason leading into this week. But if the Giants are going to make a push on the teams like the Cowboys and the Eagles, who have finished consistently ahead of them, the trenches is the place to watch in this game. That's going to be the indicator because, Paul, we could sit here and talk about all the bells and whistles that Daniel Jones has around him, the Jalen Hyatts, the Wan'Dale Robinsons, the Darren Wallers. If Daniel doesn't have the ability to survey the field, it defeats the purpose of all of this weaponry. That's why I'm not looking there in terms of what I'm watching for Sunday night. I'm looking at specifically the interior of the offensive line against Dan Quinn's aggressive defensive front. And then on the flip side, how much havoc can the Giants' pressure bring to the table against the Cowboys' offensive line, especially if they are, let's say, down one of their starting offensive linemen? That's going to determine the outcome of this game.
You have learned well, young grasshopper.
Well, I have been preaching trenches a lot. I understand that's your MO, but you got to give me a little bit more credit in terms of buying in for several years.
You have bought it.
Yes.
You have bought in a lot easier than a lot of others who resisted it for a long time. There's no doubt. And to be frank with you, that's why I believe the Giants' run game is going to have much more success than Dallas's run game on Sunday night, and that will be the primary way on how the Giants will control the flow of play, the flow of the tempo, and they will impose their will on this game. I think the Giants will win this game, and I don't think it's going to be razor close down to the end either. I really don't, because I do think the Giants will actually control things with the run, and the fact that their enhanced rush defense will stop what I believe is a Dallas run offense that has taken a step back. They don't have Ezekiel Elliott anymore to be that 1A guy. And so that whole matchup between those two running games is where it all starts, because that involves the trenches. I also believe that the Giants' additional skill position players that they've added in the passing game will allow them to have a higher efficiency in the quick game if they need to go there. Because now they've got guys like Waller and Campbell in particular, who right off the line of scrimmage can get open immediately. The Giants didn't have those guys in recent years. So if Dallas's pass rush was able to cause trouble to Daniel Jones, he had one option. He had Barkley, and that was it. And everybody knew it. If Daniel was under pressure, Barkley was getting the ball. There was no other alternative.
Other outlets this year. Yeah.
Now he's got Waller and he's got Paris Campbell, who can both get open within a second of the snap. That's how good they are. That's how crafty they are. And that's how talented that they are. Now that gives Jones 3 options if he's hurried by a quick Dallas pass rush. Changes the entire dynamic because now he's not at a disadvantage if Dallas's players get through the line.
Well, I'm with you. I do think the running game is going to be critical also because the Cowboys now have Stephon Gilmore opposite Trayvon Diggs. So they have 2 veteran experienced corners. That's also
multiple Pro Bowl players.
Correct, something different. And Jordan Lewis is back too in terms of the nickel position. So you add all of those elements in play, I'm with you. I think the importance of the run game. It's also going to be interesting because I think you have 2 run defenses from last season that are both looking to take a step up. Remember, Dallas struggled in defending the run last season.
Without a question.
In the second matchup, though, they did very well in containing Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones. They did. But overall on the season, you're talking about 130 yards given up, and the Giants were even worse. So you have 2 rushing defensive units where you look at the Giants adding Nacho and A'Shaun Robinson
and
in conjunction with Okereke and who they already have. And then Dallas, Mozzie Smith, who they drafted in the first round, big defensive tackle out of Michigan. Jonathan Hankins now is here for a full season. Remember, he was traded mid-season. I know he's a veteran, former Giant.
He's older than some of my socks.
No, 100%. There's no doubt about it. But he's more of a new face because he wasn't with the team for the entirety of last season. That's all I'm saying. I'm just bringing up the new options. Leighton Van Der Esch has been a staple, so he's not a new addition. But those 3, how much can they help stop the gap in terms of the run?
I would stack the Giants' 3 additions on their rush defense against those Dallas 3 multiple times over any day of the week. The Giants, much more significant upgrades than the Cowboys in that area.
Yeah, Giants have also a lot more volume in terms of personnel to turn to help stop the run. So I would agree with you there, but that's going to be an element in play because it could very well come down to which team can effectively run the ball.
No doubt.
To help alleviate some of their quarterbacks. Now remember, the reason why that's so critical is Dak was not sacked once in either of the 2 meetings last season. Not once. And yes, quarterback hits are important, but there were no disruptive finishers, whereas Daniel felt a lot more pressure. And how do you help accomplish that? By stopping the run.
You know what's funny? The Giants only had, 6 picks last year? They were right at the bottom of the NFL.
Tied for the lowest with the Raiders.
And they had 2 in one game against Dak.
Yeah.
Who, by the way, 15 picks last year, led the NFL with a career high.
I'd be careful, though. Context is important with that.
I always say that.
Half of them were off fingertips and chests of receivers. So it's a little misleading to me.
I'm not going to jump on that as much as I think it's an interesting stat for the Giants that, they were able to get some turnovers in a game where habitually during the course of the season, those things were very, very hard for them to come by. I like the matchup for the Giants, folks. It's just that simple.
All right, with that being said, a few reminders before we open up the phone lines and we move forward here on Friday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. You can check out the Giants Huddle podcast. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or go to giants.com/podcasts. As we fast approach the start of the season, there are still some ticket options available depending on what direction you want to go. You can take your fandom to the next level with a season ticket membership. Stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days. Memberships are now available for the 2023 campaign. To learn more about all the exclusive member benefits, visit giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available. And you could also check out some single ticket options. They're on sale now. Don't miss the Giants at MetLife Stadium this season. Visit giants.com/tickets to secure your seat. Run or walk with Giants legends. The Giants Foundation is going to host a 5K race and kids run. It's presented by Quest. Sunday, October 8th, 9 a.m. Eastern, MetLife Stadium. Net proceeds will benefit the Giants Foundation. All participants will receive a commemorative T-shirt after the race. Stay for a post-race festival with appearances by Giants legends and a live DJ. Register now at giants.com/5K. And the Giants official connected TV streaming app, it's Giants TV. It brings you original video content, including this show and game highlights. On demand and direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV, it's free. It's on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and the Giants mobile app. And if you have trouble hooking up any of those devices, the man to my left is more than happy to make house calls. See, that is something that I want to add now that the season is starting, because Paul has an overwhelming amount of time on his hands to fill once the season kicks off, of course. Okay, now that we have gotten all of those facets out of the way, let's open up the phone lines.
Let's do it.
201-939-4513.
Come on, folks, bring it now. Heavy
James
blitz
is in Georgia. He gets us going here on Friday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. What's happening, James? What do you got for us?
What's going on, guys? Y'all can hear me?
We hear you loud and clear. Yep.
All right. First, I just want to say, Paul, if it's a playoff game, please don't pick against the Giants. I had a whole, you picked against the Giants and the Eagles in the division game. This year, I don't care if they're playing the 86 Bears. We picked the Giants in the playoffs. Right?
It's funny. There were a bunch of folks who gave me grief on that, but it was just obvious that the matchup favored Philadelphia very strongly. And look, there's one thing I'll tell you. I did not go into that game necessarily. I won't say that I didn't think the Giants had any chance at all to win, but I just didn't think the percentages were very high. I mean, come on now. And you saw the way the game played out. It's just the way it is. Let's just hope the Giants have a better matchup if they get into the second round this season. How about that?
My second point is, how y'all talk about everybody wanting to have y'all close the gap. And I think that it shouldn't be just coaches speak, but it should be kind of a bravado. And, like, Daniel Jones and the rest of the guys should feel like, hey, yes, we need to get this monkey off our back of never have beaten Dallas. Like, I know it's just week one and it doesn't make or break our season week one, but psychologically, there's a bully on your block that you haven't beaten. Eventually you got to stop the bleeding. And no time than the present to go ahead and, rip that monkey off your back like they did with Steve Young that one time. Get that monkey off your back. Go ahead and show that you can beat Dallas, beat a divisional rival, and if we don't win another game past that, hey, progress, we're beating, we're making progress on beating Dallas. You know what I'm saying?
All right, James. Well, appreciate the phone call. In terms of getting the monkey off your back, which is the phrase that the last caller utilized, you have to understand this. There's a lot of guys in the locker room, Paul, and I don't think this gets discussed enough because both coaches have been asked about this. McCarthy was asked about how Dallas has been dominant against the Giants and whether that registers with his team, and Dable's been asked the opposite. And I think Dable had insinuated this and alluded to this, the fact that there's a lot of guys on this Giants roster that have not been a part of this rivalry.
I can give you numbers. Usually, every year, you'll get between 20 and 30% of turnover. This year, as the Giants open this game on Sunday night against the Cowboys, they will have 15 first-time Giants on their 53-man roster who were not here in the past. 15 new faces.
Sure.
5 of them are on offense. 10 of them are on defense. On my Twitter, I already put it up about an hour ago, the names of those guys. That's 28% of the Giants roster is new to this team for opening day. I did not do the same for the Cowboys. But what I will tell you is, psychologically, there can be a little baggage for some guys who have been around for several years. For example, Saquon Barkley has played in 8 games against the Cowboys and lost all 8.
Well, of course, because he goes back to 2018. Though.
So
there
can be a little psychological voice.
I'll give you that
for some guys,
but very few.
Yeah,
and that's my point. Paris Campbell, for example, what does he know about the Cowboys-Giants rivalry?
Bobby Okereke.
Yeah, I mean, what do these guys care at the end of the day? So
Not
when you
relevant.
go to them, for example,
You think Tay Banks gives a crap?
No, of course. When a reporter goes up to a player, and I'm not calling out the media, I understand they have stories to write, and it's a big narrative and a big theme. But what I'm saying is, you go to Paris Campbell and you tell him, hey, Dallas has beaten the Giants 10 in a row with Dak Prescott as the starting quarterback. Like, what is Paris Campbell going to say? How does that register in his mind? He's like, okay, that's a great nugget, but what does that affect my mindset when I go out and play the game on Sunday?
There was a reporter the other day went up to Dexter Lawrence and asked that question of him, but phrased it in a way, he said, does it bother you that Dak Prescott has a 10-game winning streak against the Giants? And the defensive player just kind of laughed and said, oh, no, we got a game to play Sunday night. I'm worried about what happens Sunday night. We're going to be ready.
Sure.
It's like, did you really expect him to sit there and say, oh, you know what? I'm happy that we've never beaten Dak. That puts a real smile on my face. It makes my lunch taste better.
That's why the psychological argument and games that sometimes are played leading into the contest, I just don't think carry a lot of weight. Barkley, you bring up a good point. If somebody's been here for the duration or the length of that winning streak, maybe it could be a thorn in the side of the player. Yeah, it's annoying. I'd like to go out there and get one against Dallas.
Yeah.
That I get.
It can be a little extra spark potentially in the subconscious, but it's not something I believe that the players today, it's different before the days of the salary cap and free agency. When you had guys staying together for a long
Wasn't a lot of
period
player
of time,
movement. Sure.
you knew those guys year in and year out, and they knew you. And trust me, there was some bad blood that would build up over the course of years because you had basically, for the most part, the same kind of roster. There wasn't a ton of player movement in those days.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. Guys like Wan'Dale Robinson, Darren Waller, I mean, they don't know anything about this Giants-Cowboys rivalry. And even an Evan Neal, who didn't even play a complete season. I mean, he's just delving in to the rivalry himself. So all of those things, I think, need to be taken into consideration. Let's head back to the phone lines as we move forward here on BBKL. Scott is in New Mexico joining us here on Friday's edition of the program. What's happening, Scott? What do you got for us?
Hi, guys. A question. Before I get to my main point, I understand that Daniel Jones's contract was reworked to free up some cap space, I think $6.3 million.
Yeah.
Can that money be used this year, or is it strictly for next year?
No, any cap space that results at the end of the season can be swapped into next year's cap. You can push it back and add it to next year's if you like. But you got to remember something. What a lot of folks don't understand is that until Thursday, that was yesterday, the cap was only your top 51.
Yep.
Okay? That's what the number was based on. Once you got to yesterday, the cap now includes 53, plus all your practice squad guys, plus all your injured guys. So the number changes. In reality, the Giants were unofficially over the cap until they made the Daniel Jones maneuver. Now that the Jones maneuver has taken place and the official season cap took effect yesterday, they're only like $1.5 million or something under the cap right now. So that's why they had to do something once the all 53 plus others were going to be counted against their number.
Which is also, by the way, not a great position to be in. Because
No.
if you ask most general managers, they'll tell you you want to have about between $5 to $10 million in available cap space going into the season simply because of the injuries that are going to pile up.
Every time you bring up a practice squad guy, you got
costs
to
you
pay
money.
for it.
Correct.
So even like the 2 practice squad activations a week, every weekend are going to cost you money.
That's more of a reason why you see some of the tweaks of these contracts right before the season starts.
No doubt.
Because you know teams are trying to gain at least some more wiggle room to prepare for those circumstances.
Okay. Let me get to my main question. I think you.
Oh, that was the appetizer? I didn't realize. Okay, you were preparing us for the main course. Okay. We got to label it accordingly. Yes.
Yeah. Well, actually, you are the 2 best guys, I think, to answer this question, Paul, because of your experience. And I think, Lance, you have a great analytical mind. And, Paul, you've watched the guys in practice. So my main question to you, I'm very confident the Giants are going to win this game. I have some information that I'm going to keep to myself, but...
Oh, you got sources. Wow, look at this. Scott's got sources.
Well,
he's got an appetizer, a main course, and he's got sources. Wow, this
I belong
phone
to
call
a
really is adding intrigue. Yeah.
I'll just give you a little tidbit. I belong to a consortium that's 60 guys that we bet amongst each other. So we do a lot of analysis ourselves, and we're confident the Giants will win this game.
Oh, okay. See, I thought you were actually spying in a Cowboys practice.
No.
Okay, so at least now you gave us some context. Okay, I got it. Yes. So a group of 60 individuals, by the way. I just want the nation to be aware. Scott knows 59 other men that throw around some moolah, and we'll leave it at that. Yes.
Right. Okay. Well, it's an internal thing, and if I had to tell you how we do it, we'd have to kill you. So
of course,
yes.
Well, we can't reveal all those secrets.
What do you got?
Sure. Yes.
So my question to you guys is, we've talked about players that hopefully will never be injured because it will have a detrimental effect on the Giants, like an Andrew Thomas. But if you had to pick one component of the Giants, whether it be linebacker, whether it be offensive line, whether it be defensive line, which is the component of the Giants organization, the players that they have, that can least afford, and I'm talking about depth. I'm talking about that if, say, 2 players from the linebacking core got injured, they really would be downtrodden. Is it safety? Is it cornerback? Is it defensive line? I don't think it's receiver, but I wanted to get your perspective and from both opinions and say what's the one element, one group that can least afford to have any major injuries and that the Giants wouldn't be able to fulfill them in a way that would let them continue on their winning way.
No, and it's a fair question, Scott, and we'll let you go on that note and appreciate the phone call. Paul, I don't know if you want to start with respect to, is there a position that you say, hey, they suffer an injury, it's going to be very hard for them to recover, as it stands right now, of course?
You know, it's funny because the obvious answer that most people would come up with right away is Andrew Thomas. If Andrew Thomas should go down, then Matthew Pert, the third tackle on the roster, would have to go in. And I know how people have just slammed him over his difficulties in pass protection against the Jets during the preseason. And there's no doubt that Andrew Thomas was second-team All-NFL. And when you go from second-team All-NFL to your third tackle, that's a significant drop-off. And that's not a knock on Pert, but that's a significant drop-off. So I would think that would be the one spot that probably would hurt the most. But even if that happened, I don't think that totally derails their hopes to be a playoff team. I just don't. I think this team, Scott, this team is that good. This 53 is that good. They've got that much depth now where not only are the starting 22 really good, but they've got guys who are playable behind them, like the Giants haven't had in over a decade.
I'll go two spots, and I'll rank them accordingly. The first one, and I'll focus in on an individual player like you did.
Sure.
I think if they lose Bobby Okereke, that could be troublesome in terms of the depth behind him.
I will say this. I thought about Okereke. I'm going to counter and tell you that between McFadden, Simmons, and Beavers would probably be activated off the practice squad if they needed him to.
Yeah.
They could probably get by. But Okereke is a big deal.
And he's an every down linebacker in terms of
right.
a run stopper. So that would concern me there. It actually reminds me of a few years ago, if you remember, Blake Martinez goes down early in the season against the Falcons.
And David Mayo had to go in, and there was a huge drop-off.
Correct, yeah.
I don't know. I think Wink could scheme it better than Patrick Graham did, and I think the backups have more talent than David Mayo.
And I'm with you there.
So I don't know that would crush them.
I just think it's a significant loss, especially if the whole point of bringing him in is to help stop your run.
It's a loss.
Okay. The second one I would go to is the pass rush. And I know that they made some additions since the start of the season here in terms of bringing in Isaiah Simmons, but Isaiah Simmons is not a conventional every down edge rusher, okay?
Right.
So he doesn't close the gap as much. And, I mean, even a guy like Boogie Basham, too, is not a conventional guy
not
with
an
respect
edge
to
pass
that.
rusher.
So what I'm saying is if Aziz, who I labeled on Monday's show as a huge delivering critical year for him, or Kayvon goes down, that would concern me as well. So those are the two spots that I would turn to.
I can't really argue that it would be a big hit if they did lose either one of those guys. Again, I have such faith in Wink, and I think that somehow, some way, they would get bruised, but I don't think it would destroy their playoff chances. I really don't. They would take a hit, but it wouldn't ruin them.
I just, once again, go back to the question of if we were to identify certain features and facets. I think all three of those are worthy to take into consideration. Let's head back to the phone lines. Dave is in Cranford, joining us here on BBKL. What's happening, Dave? What do you got for us?
Good to talk to you guys. I love what you're saying. It's really, really, really great show. I'm going to agree with a lot of things. Thanks, guys. I'm going to agree with a lot of things and reiterate a couple things because I think they're really important. But I do think that the loss of Donovan Wilson, and I don't think there's any chance he plays, I think that's a pretty big loss for Dallas. If you look, he's their number one safety, probably, after, Diggs, maybe the other corner now, but he's one of their top 3, 4, 5 guys on defense. And I think
he's a big deal.
I think that's a big deal.
Last year, Dallas only gave up one receiving touchdown to a tight end, which was the second best number in the National Football League. So specifically in the red zone, they did the job clamping down on tight ends. So you could say that if they had their full complement, Waller may have a more difficult time getting past the goal line. So to your point, if he's out, that's certainly going to ding them some and may open things up more for Waller.
Listen, I'm not disagreeing, but keep in mind, Wilson did miss a good portion of the 2021 season when he was out. He only played 9 games, and that was Dan Quinn's first year, and they had a really good defense that year. And I'll look it up, but if memory serves me correctly, I think Cowboys played the Raiders on Thanksgiving that year, and they held Waller to like 2 catches. I'd have to go back and see whether or not Donovan was in that game, but they have experienced time without him. That's the only thing that I would at least point to within Dan Quinn's defense, not somebody else's defense.
Yep. I think the other point, the one thing out of all the iterations, and I've called in a couple times, and all the lists and everything, I'm really happy to now be in a time where we're talking about real football.
Absolutely.
So I think of all the changes to the roster, the one thing going into Sunday night that I think we're going to be able to, hang our hat on, and you guys have already said this, but I'll say it again, is the run defense. Dallas ran against us for 340 yards in the two games last year. And I think, Paul, you brought up a good point. I think it's so underrated of them losing, or moving on from Zeke or whatever. I'm not sure if it was because Barkley was on the other sideline, but Zeke always played well against us. Yeah, he's a step slow and he's not, the player he used to be, yada yada yada. But he was always tough for us, and I think not having him is actually a big deal. But I actually think the bigger deal for us, whether he was there or not, is the fact that, one, there's a huge focus on the run defense this year. 2, I think, bottom line is, even in our backups, the one thing you could say about, Boogie or, some of our backups on the edge that will come in at some points during the game, those guys know how to push back and set the edge. And, that's what they're going to need, because I think Bobby Okereke, I think he's going to have, a 7, 8, 9, 10 tackle game. Because, I think, his ability to flow to the ball and be able to control that outside zone, which is what killed us last year, absolutely ate our lunch, against many teams, but definitely against Dallas. Now that just changes your whole defense. It just changes everything in terms of your pressure packages, what type of down and distance you're talking about. Too many times last year, our pass rushers were rushing against a 3rd and 2 and a 3rd and 3, and those are tough downs and distances to rush against. So I think that is one big change. And I think the other one is simply last year watching this coaching staff scheme from week to week with fill-in players. I mean, there were times where they were scheming and changing schemes with guys that were on the roster for a week
right.
or 2.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yep.
Maybe, and yet their schemes were, weren't always perfect, and they had their ups and downs, but they were remarkable. And my point is that, they didn't wake up 2 weeks ago and say, oh my gosh, Micah Parsons is on the Cowboys. Oh my gosh, Dexter Lawrence is on the Cowboys.
On the Giants. DeMarcus Lawrence, you were talking about.
DeMarcus.
I'm
yes.
sorry.
That's okay.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
No relation, by the way.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank God he's not on the freaking Cowboys. Anyway, they didn't just wake up and, so my point is that, yes, I think they'll want to do certain things on offense. I think they'll want to push those safeties back and use some of their speed to be able to take some stuff over the top, or even in the short passing game. But if the matchups on the line don't go well, I absolutely believe that this offensive staff will have a plan for that, and that they'll be able to adjust enough to win the game. And I believe, like Paul said, it's killing me how much I'm agreeing with Paul, but I love Paul.
It's okay.
Okay, and that is...
It's okay, there are therapists on hand to help and handle those circumstances. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
I'll let you go on this. I do think that this is a really strong game for us. I think if you really look at it, closely, there's some major issues, but I think, but those are the 2 things I'd hang my hat on: run defense and our coaching staff.
All right, Dave.
I think those are the big differences.
Thank you, Dave.
Appreciate the phone call.
And I want to add something to the Ezekiel Elliott thing that we haven't talked about, and it's our fault for not doing it. Elliott was very good at picking up the blitz.
Sure.
Yeah. And the Cowboys right now do not have an established blitz picker-upper in their running back core. They do not.
Well, Pollard's been on 3rd downs.
He's been in, but he is not the kind of guy like Elliott who would stick his nose in there and really stone.
A different size back.
Different. Didn't have the grit, if you will, that Elliott had, who was very willing to step in front of a pass rusher and knock the snot out of that guy if he really needed to. Elliott was that kind of guy. That's not there anymore. okay? Which means when Wink does send his heat, they don't need to go through Elliott now, maybe as a pickup to get to Dak. They're going to get him this week, all right? I'm going to tell you that right now. The Giants will not wind up with 0 sacks on Dak Prescott Sunday night. They will get him.
Well, I would say they have to get him.
They will.
I think that's a critical area to watch.
They will.
Yeah. Rico Dowdle is the other running back who's been with the Cowboys since 2020, but once again, not a big guy, though. A little bit more to his frame than Deuce Vaughn, who they drafted in the 6th round. I would think, though, that in any significant passing situation, Tony Pollard will probably be out on the field because he's their most experienced and
they're going to want him out in a route. They're not going to want him back in pass protection.
But you also brought up a key point, just like you were talking about if Daniel's under pressure, them having additional outlets to get rid of the football this year. You could argue the same thing with the Cowboys, that Tony could be that outlet.
They have plenty of outlets.
Yeah,
that is
true.
That's
That's the other thing to take into consideration.
That is no doubt something that can help them. I would say if the Giants see, I'm just a Wink guy, I have great respect for Dan Quinn. Heck, when he was available as the coordinator and was up for a potential interview with the Giants as head coach, I was like, yeah, that's the guy. You know, I was a big Dan Quinn fan, always have been. I have great respect for him. I like Wink's chances to scheme against that Dallas front right now, especially if they've got the injury. I like his chances to effectively get to their quarterback than the other way around. I just do.
I mean, to me, I'm very even on a lot of these things.
I got you. That's
I
all
don't
right.
know if necessarily there's a huge advantage. Also, because we've seen crazy things in week 1. I'm also taking
See, I
all
think
that
the
into
Giants' run
consideration.
game will have to keep Dallas's defense a little more honest than vice versa. I don't think the Cowboys' run game will be able to keep the Giants honest. I don't think so.
Well, the thing is, I think there's more of, I would argue, Paul, and if you disagree, that's fine. I think there's more of an unknown with the Cowboys' run game than there is with the Giants. Meaning with the Giants, we know the participants, and we've seen the majority of this offensive line function, with, of course, the exception of John Michael Schmitz. With Dallas, we know the offensive line, but we've never seen it operate without Zeke in the mix. So we don't know, A, how much they're going to utilize another running back. Okay, you know, maybe Tony Pollard is their main guy. And then does Pollard take on a different role compared to what he did last season? So there's a little bit more of a guessing game with that.
There is. I'll take the logical perspective in saying it's not going to be as effective.
Well, there's no doubt about it that Zeke added that power element and power dynamic, whether it be in the short yardage or in terms of going off the edge. But Tony also, if you go back, especially to the game with Cooper Rush last season, had a big run because of his elusiveness. So they're not losing the elusiveness. You could argue, where's the power going to come from when maybe they have to convert a 3rd and 1 in the middle of the field? That, I think, question mark. But operating outside of those short yardage situations, Tony, I think, has enough experience that he's proven that at least he can handle that. But how they add these complementary backs is definitely the land to the unknown.
It's going to be a fun game.
It will, absolutely.
I have a quick off-air question from Tom from Stratford. He was just curious about who you think Dexter Lawrence and Leonard will be lining up against most of the time during the game. He said he was a little confused about nose tackle and just who they'll be matching up against.
I think the Giants are going to use a combination of fronts. I don't think Dexter will always be lined up over the center, Biotish.
Yep.
I think there will be times when the Giants are going to go with 2 down. There'll be times they'll have 3 down. They'll have 4 down in the dirt. There might even be a few times every once in a while they have 5 down. And you know what? Remember, Rex Ryan had the original amoeba defense where all 11 guys would stand up, and you didn't know what anybody was going to do. Wink showed that a few times last year. He's got that in his bag of tricks. I don't think you're going to see any one player having to deal with Dexter Lawrence the entire night.
I also think it depends on the situation at left guard, too, right?
Sure.
I mean, that's going to dictate a lot of what Wink may do. If Tyler Smith's in the lineup, you maybe don't look at that as a huge advantage. If Tyler Smith's not in the lineup, then you say, okay, let's test the young guy and see whether or not he can handle Dexter Lawrence. So that could come depending on the inactives and who's out there for the Dallas Cowboys. Let's head back to the phone lines as we move along here. Big Ed is in Maryland joining us on BBKL. What's happening, Big Ed?
Hey, what's up, guys? What's up?
Hey, Big Ed. Good to talk to you.
What's going going on?
Long time, man. Long time.
Yes, sir. Everything all right up there?
It's all good.
All well.
It's all good.
Yeah.
You coming to the game?
I would love to come to the game. I'm not going to make it.
Oh, all right.
Yeah,
Hey, but it's okay. You'll have a big smile on your face Monday morning.
yeah, because that will be the game. This first game is the game. It's like another Super Bowl to a degree, and it's the first game out. We got to stay together and stay tight, man. Not tight like we don't move, but we got to get to that. That's all there is to it. That's all I keep hearing. That's all I keep understanding. We lost this man twice. No, 10 times straight. We never beat him since he grew.
He's got 10 wins in a row as a starter against the Giants. Yeah. That's correct.
I mean, the Cowboys with Dak as the starter have 10 straight wins. I mean, that's the best way to look at it. Dak himself didn't go out and win those 10
We
games.
discuss that all the time.
So I think the wording of that is important. Maybe it's semantics, but the semantics add up in my book. But go ahead, Big Ed.
Yeah, man, that's what to do, man. We just got to get to that.
Yeah, well, that's what we were talking about on this show. Sure.
And look, and I have to say this too. I don't want to keep everybody out, but Isaiah Simmons, we wanted to draft him when he was coming out of Florida State. We wanted to grab him, but somebody
he was Clemson. He was Clemson, Big Ed.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He was Clemson. And you know, as much as you and I were huge fans of his, I did eventually wind up settling on Andrew Thomas because I was really, really hurting for that left tackle. And so he turned out being my pick. But I always said that Isaiah Simmons would be the best defensive player in that draft, better than Chase Young. And we will see how that plays out because
the jury is still
right
very
now,
much out.
neither guy has totally lived up to their billing.
Yep.
Look, and all he got to do is be healthy. Him and K just got to be healthy. And we can rush that quarterback, but you got to get to Zach, though. If you don't get to Zach, he can burn us, and we don't need to be burned.
All right, Big Ed. Appreciate the phone call.
Oh, yeah, one quick other thing.
Yeah, real quick.
Thank you for getting Dion. You're welcome.
Okay, I'm not exactly sure what that's in reference to, but we appreciate the phone call.
We got Dion?
I have no idea what he's talking about. Literally, I'm just as perplexed as you. So
Deion Sanders?
I don't know what he was referring to. I don't know which
Dion in the Belmonts?
There's a lot of Dions out there. So if you know what Dion and you know Big Ed and you can solve this riddle, feel free to reach out to us
Dion?
on that front. Yes, you could sit here and name every Dion on the face of
Marcel
the earth.
Dion?
I'm still not going to have an answer
Actually,
for you.
Dion, but we'll for the purposes
maybe
of this.
Deontay Banks, maybe?
There you go.
There you go.
Oh, that's what he probably means. He probably means Tay Banks.
Okay.
Yeah. That was you know how much I wanted him too.
Well,
see, the Giants got that guy.
Yeah, but I have never heard anybody refer to him as Dion.
No, nor have I.
So, Tay maybe.
Yeah. Well, that's what he is. He goes by Tay.
Yeah, okay.
He goes by Tay.
I don't know what he was referring to. Or whether or not we were going back in time and he wanted to draft Deion Sanders or something like that. And unfortunately, it didn't cooperate as the Atlanta Falcons came in calling. Because remember, he did make a Florida State reference, and Deion Sanders did go to Florida State. So
yes, he did.
We're trying
I think
to
that's where he was
connect
going.
the dots. Okay. There we go. Finally, some closure with respect to that phone call. But as far as some of the things that he brought up with respect to the pass rush, it's something that we've emphasized going back to the Giants in games last season. I mean, the other thing that I was looking at statistic-wise last season, the Giants were, 2-7 against teams with winning records last season, okay?
That's the way it is, though, in the NFL today. You have to beat the teams you're supposed to beat, and then if you have some trouble against the others, well, okay, deal with that when you get to the playoffs.
Yeah. No, I mean, listen, you don't get brownie points for the pathway you take to get to the playoffs. And that's not why I was bringing it up. But
okay.
Yeah, what I was bringing it up was because if we're talking about, we've had a lot of callers on this show weigh in and say you got to get the monkey off your back with respect to beating Dallas and the close the gap narrative. Well, you also, if you're going to prove that you have taken a step forward, you need to also beat teams. And I know we're only just out of the gate, so nobody has a record coming into this game, but you want to see that mark improve, Paul. When you do go up against teams with winning records this season, you don't want it to add up and showcase 2-7 overall. Because you can't expect to go like that in the division again, 1-4-1, have that mark against teams with winning records, and have the ball bounce your way in close games to get into the postseason. So, I mean, that to me is also something to add to the list of you want to steer in a different direction based on how last season played.
I understand. It's more of a perception and an emotional thing that people talk about when they kind of delve into those waters about team having a hex or team having a whammy on another team or owning another team for so many years.
Yeah.
Heck, Parcells owned Joe Gibbs' Redskins and Bill Walsh's 49ers for the most part during his tenure with the Giants. And those teams kept saying, how we got to beat Parcells and the Giants. We got to do it. And, at some point, the tide will turn. Tom Coughlin had a good run against the Eagles for a while, too.
Yep.
And then guess what? It turned. And so, that every high tide will eventually become a low tide.
There you go.
It happens.
Yeah. Well, the only thing is, though, and this goes back to your initial point, Parcells was during the pre-salary cap era.
Yeah.
So it was easier to keep the teams together,
Yes.
right? Whereas with Tom Coughlin...
And the blood would boil.
Yeah. No, but what I'm saying is that if you had trouble beating the Giants one season, you would say, okay, it's possible you can have issues the next season
Yes.
because the roster was together.
Yes. The turnover now is much more.
Yeah, from season to season.
No question.
It doesn't carry much weight. And the other reason why I bring up the losing against teams with winning records is at the end of the season, and I don't know if NFL teams care about this, but the dialogue in terms of the fans and the media is, well, how much substance we put into the record of that team the previous year. Meaning, look at who they beat. Look at who they lost to. So it was a record that rings hollow because it was a product of taking advantage of a favorable schedule or something to that degree. I guess that's what I'm referencing with respect to records like that. All right.
I would only close by saying this. I mentioned it to a caller yesterday, and I know we got to run because we got to get to the locker room. I will reiterate this again. We talk about it all the time during the playoffs especially. It's a matchup game. Matchups make fights. I love to use the boxing analogy. I've been doing it forever. Well, it's really the same way during the regular season. You could very easily lose to a team with a losing record if they've got the proper matchup that can attack your Achilles.
Oh, sure.
That's just the way it works. So it's very shallow and makes really not a whole lot of sense to just say, well, they lost to a team with a losing record, so we should have no trouble beating them.
Oh, 100%.
No, it has to do with how do the matchups go, and do they actually coincide with the other team's Achilles as to whether or not they really deserve to beat that other team. It's not about the one-loss records.
Well, if you remember, they played the Niners, 2-3 years ago. Nick Mullins started. Remember Jimmy Garoppolo and everybody went down against the Jets the previous week?
I'll give you a great example.
And they got clobbered as a result.
You think the Minnesota Vikings fans and organization thought that, oh, wow, they've got the higher seed. The Giants are coming out here with only a 9-win team. Okay, Giants only got 9 wins. They're coming out to Minnesota. We got a first-round home playoff game. The purple people eaters and the crazy people inside that stadium. You think they really thought? Well, if they were smart, they would have looked at the matchup like we did and said, okay, the Giants have the hammer for their Achilles. The Giants should be favored in this game. The Giants will win this game. We knew that. But the Minnesota folks who just looked at the records were probably thinking, oh, we're going to go to the second round.
Well, I think the previous regular season matchup should have given them enough of an
Should have.
And I guarantee you people in the Vikings building did not overlook the Giants.
I will say this. If you saw the whiteout before kickoff of that playoff game, you'd think that the Minnesota fans actually thought they had a chance to win that game.
Well, that's the difference between the fan mentality and the reality mentality.
What are you going to do?
Let's try to squeeze in one quick one here. Andrew's on Long Island joining us on BBKL. What's happening, Andrew?
Hey, what's going on, man? I'm going to try to make this quick. I know you got to go.
Sure.
I just want to make a bold prediction.
Absolutely. We're all ears.
All right. Let's get bold prediction for week 1 and for the season.
Okay.
I think for bold prediction for week 1, I think that Giants and Washington are going to be tied for first place in the division.
Okay. I don't know how bold that is, but go ahead. Yeah.
Season, it's bold. It's bold.
Yeah.
And then the season, I think Daniel Jones is going to have 30 total touchdowns between rushing and passing.
Okay. All right.
That's all.
Sounds good. Appreciate the phone call. Well, he had 15 and 7 last season. So he had 22 total.
Right.
Plus 8. I think that's perhaps reasonable.
He'll throw for over 20 this year, I think.
Within striking distance. Well, I certainly would hope so.
Yeah, I would think.
Yeah. I mean, 20's not asking for much, especially if you want your offense to take a jump. But with that being said, that is going to wrap up Friday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. Sunday Night Football, Giants and the Cowboys. And actually next week, we will actually have a game to break down and discuss. How about that? That is a sense of relief from that standpoint. The reminder, today's episode of Big Blue Kickoff Live, part of the Giants platforms everywhere and Giants.com/podcasts. For Paul Dottino, I'm Lance Medow. Enjoy the game. Stay locked to Giants.com, and we'll speak to you on Monday right here at 12:30 p.m. Eastern as we do it all over again. Have a good one.